Hello and welcome to this IGSS WebEx for version 12, where we'll go through some of the news for X version 12. Before we start, I would like to inform you that you're on the phone. Please do not take any other calls, because then the rest of us will hear you are waiting music and it's difficult to have the rest of the WebEx. Here in my room, it's me, Flemming Hansen, and with me I have Martin Andersen and Johan Johannessen. So I actually hope you all connected to the audio, and then we'll start. I'll start by giving the hand to Martin, and he'll tell you what are the news in X version 12. Feel free to ask questions along the way, or we'll also have a Q&A in the end. So thanks for your time.
Okay, hello, good morning. Could at least one acknowledge that he can hear what I'm saying?
Morning. Hello.
Morning. Fine, thank you. As Flemming said, I'm going to walk you through all the news in IGSS version 12 in about an hour. And there's quite a lot of ground to cover, so I'll just head right for it. The presentation is divided into 4 parts. First, I'll look at all the new engineering features, and then a bit with the more end-user-oriented features and a demonstration part at the end. The majority of this presentation is going to be a PowerPoint, which will also be made available to you after the session. If you have any questions, do it as we speak or later during the Q&A session. The first big change is how we deal with IGSS software upgrades. And upgrades in this term is not how you go from version 10 to 11 or 11 to 12. It's how you maintain within a version number. Existing IGSS have been using an update server on the web, where you online could draw down the latest build. And that had the effect that you, over time, first, when you looked at the latest build in the office, you would have, like in this build 15203, and then when you started upgrade up on site, you would have a newer build, and if it took some time to upgrade all the stations on site, you could have different build numbers. First of all, that is not perfect, and you needed to have internet connection on the site. In version 12, we changed this completely so that you can, we still have the update server, but when you download the latest build, it's in the form of a zip file. So you can take this zip file, validate it in your office, then go to site with exactly the same version as you validated in the office, and update from that zip file. That's one change. The one change is that the other change is that you can actually have your own private update server on site, so you can assign one of the IGSS servers to be your update server. And that means that you don't have to manually go through all the stations on site. You can just update the server and then push the latest or the installed version to all the other stations on site. And even remote operator stations that are not necessarily online all the time will be updated later when a user logs on. We hope that to be a huge time saver in maintaining an IGSS on a site. So you can do an offline upgrade, which allows you to validate new versions in the office, and you can upgrade all the clients from the IGSS server. You can do the push, and you can even roll back in the event that you, by mistake, updated to some version that you didn't like. When you install stations with version 12, you need to take this into account. By default, version 12 will work like version 11, which means you have to do a manual update on each station. If you want to take advantage of this automatic update from a server, you need to launch the IGSS updater application on the station that you upgrade, and then set it like here to use an IGSS station where you enter a network address. You can even choose to have a zip file on a shared net location if you want that. Just remember that when you upgrade, you just have to look at this so you don't have to go through it again later on. The next big time saver is in system configuration. That is where you configure all your stations, drivers, nodes, etc. In version 12, it's possible to do copy and paste at all levels, which means station, driver, node, interface, and channel. That's not so interesting. Especially station and node is very interesting. The node means that you can very easily do a copy of a pump station, which is typically another node below a driver. Or if you want to do a complete copy of a station, that is very, very simple. It's just like copy and paste in all other applications. So you just highlight the one you want, say copy, and then locate the selection where it should be replicated, and then choose paste. Also, you can now define a station to be a priority station. That's one of the check marks on the station tab. Priority station means that this station will not be disconnected when trying to regain station connections. This is used in the instance where you actually have more stations connected than the license you have purchased. Some customers only purchase, for instance, 4 operator stations, but then actually connect more than 4 stations. IGSS handles that by disconnecting the stations that has been idle for the longest time. Also, if you have distributed drivers, you can now have 16 stations with distributed drivers. Server synchronization. This is where you have multiple servers. I could spend a whole day just on this topic. I won't. Just say that a lot of effort has been put into allow you to specify what needs to be synchronized. For historical reasons, the dualized server solution in IGSS was never meant to produce 2 completely similar servers in terms of the data you look at from a user perspective. The purpose was to ensure a very, very high runtime security. But now it's possible to specify much more about what needs to be synchronized. We will produce a document along, it's already on the website, which in very great detail discuss every change to all this. So have a look if you use dualized servers. The next change is to how we handle backups of the configuration. For many years, we've had a single folder in the configuration folder just called backup, where we had the latest configurations files that was checked and installed. They were copied to that location, but that also meant that you didn't have the history. Now that has been changed so that we always save. We never delete any backups. We keep them for good. So you have to do it manually. It's not a problem because the files are not that big, and hard disks are very big now. And we generate this backup whenever you do a check and install, following all fixes in the consistency checker. I'll get back to that in a second. And you can even do a manual backup in the definition module. You can just say, I want to make sure that what I have right now is backed up. This will allow you always to go back to a good version if something bad should happen to your configuration. Second, it's also possible to actually translate all the text in a configuration. For version 11, we did a tool for that. It's always been possible to do it directly in the database, but it was pretty complicated in terms of what you needed to do. For version 11, we did this tool. I just wanted to mention it again because it was not part of the original version 11 launch. It might be interesting for some of you that do configurations for other languages than the one already included in IGSS. Object features. This covers a lot of the changes we've done to how we handle objects. Already in version 11, we introduced the concept of free value atoms for analog objects. We included 3 atoms that you could use for pretty any use you had in mind. We didn't add any functionality to these atoms like we do on the alarm atoms. We've doubled that to 6, and for the digital objects, we've included the same amount of free atoms, 6. The purpose is the same. You can use them to utilize additional process information without the need to pay for a dedicated IGSS object. So if you have a VLT, you can have some of the internal figures from that displayed along with the operational status of the pump without the need for an analog object. It becomes very interesting because now you can actually define the atom names, both for the free values, but also you can redefine the atom names for all the predefined atoms. So actual value can be renamed to temperature if you want. And that means that everywhere the end user would have seen actual value, he will now see temperature. And it's especially handy for the free value atoms. In version 11, you would just see the value, the term free value 1 through 3. Now you can actually change free value 1 to be something meaningful, like sensor current or whatever you want. They're used throughout the system, so wherever the end user has the option to see an atom name, he will now see this new text that you put into the definition. You can define it at the template level, and then the atom name that you have specified will be propagated to all the objects you have based on this template, and in that case you can then override it at a specific object, or you can just specify it for all the objects. We've also removed all the sort of very strange names like HAPV that you could see in the user interface. We've also changed how we actually count objects as part of the license. For historical reasons, some elements of IGSS count as objects. A diagram is an object. I know in your perception, it's not an object, but it is in terms of how it was implemented originally, and it's also why it counts as an object. Until now, we have had thousands of these objects for free. We've changed that to be 50% of the full license, but never less than 1,000. So if you buy a 10,000 object license, you will now get, of course, the 10,000 I/O objects, but then 5,000 of these non-I/O. It becomes particularly interesting because objects with local-only atoms no longer count as these I/O objects. They did in version 11 and previously. Now, if you only have local atoms, it's part of the free pool of objects. This means you can now have objects that you only use for VBA, calculations, etc., without the need for actually pay for this object. This is very similar to how memory tag works in other SCADA systems. Locking and alarms. This is somewhat end-user oriented, but it's mainly on the configuration side that we've changed stuff. On locking, we've always had a deadband where you could specify a relative change, but very often it wasn't used because it was relative change based on whatever value you had right now. So if the value was 1 and you had a relative change of 1%, then the real signal change was 0.01, whereas if the value was 100, you would have a different change before the locking took place. We've changed that so that now you can choose between relative change or percent change of full scale, which means that it becomes more deterministic when the value will be locked. Hope is that you will use this so that the amount of locked data can be reduced a bit. We see more and more configurations with huge amount of lockings, so huge that the end user suffers because it takes time when he takes a trend, because we need to retrieve all these data. This has also caused us to actually increase the number of log files. All the lockings in IGSS are stored in a binary file, 1 file per hour. That has now been increased to 16 files per hour if the system is bigger than 2,000 objects. This will give a huge performance increase when read, without impacting when we write lockings. The design of the IGSS lock system is based on that it shouldn't impact too much during daily writing on the server. The good thing is that you don't need to convert any of the existing log files. This change is backward compatible, so you can just upgrade a site and you don't have to run any tools to convert existing log files. Alarms. IGSS has never had the concept of alarm ended state. Ended means the signal went into the alarm state, it went above the alarm limit and then went back into the normal range, but the user hasn't acknowledged it yet. IGSS simply had a concept, did not have a concept for this state. It has now, it's called the ended state. It has, of course, got its own color in the alarm list, so you can distinguish between active and ended alarms. The alarm list has been extended with an alarm state column. In version 11, for the end user to determine whether or not an alarm in the list was currently active, you had to display 3 timestamps, and then he had to look at all 3 to see there and which was not. This has now been replaced by a single alarm state and a single timestamp. We still have the old ones if you need to be backward compatible. It's also possible now for the operator to change alarm delays in supervise. Some end users have had this request. And it's possible to specify which priority is required for an alarm indication to propagate on our diagram references. If you use it, you know what it is. This means that you can now do an alarm list like this, which I would prefer if I was on a site. It's very clear what state you're in. It says active, ended, or acknowledged. It's very clear what priority. You have the highest priority on the top, and a single timestamp for when we enter the current state. This might also be a very good opportunity to actually talk to the end users. What do they expect from the alarm system, from the alarm list? I think a lot of the confusion on sites in terms of alarms is due to the fact that you never had a good conversation with the end user. What does he expect? Many end users are actually suffering quite a lot from nuisance alarms, and over time they learn to live with alarm lists that are always pretty full, and it shouldn't be like that. Okay, Notifier. This is the module where you can retransmit alarms on mobile phones. It's not that often used in foreign countries, but now you can send text messages without using a physical GSM modem. For IGSS servers running in virtualized environments, the physical GSM modem is becoming increasingly difficult to handle. We've now added drivers for some of the web-based services. We've looked at, there's a lot of suppliers of these services. We've looked at the market and taken a few of the big ones. If you end up with an end customer that has a specific requirement because it's already a customer with a specific service, let us know. It's typically very, very easy to implement these protocols. Yeah, I'll skip the later part. Development and design is all the graphical options you have. The first you'll notice when you open an IGS configuration in version 12 is most likely this dialog saying that it has some inconsistencies. And what that means is that we've had a command line tool used by the support and some high-level end customers that could actually run through all our files and databases and check for inconsistencies. Did all the different references add up? And we have decided to put that tool into the standard definition module. The computers now are so fast that even a 50,000 object configuration takes less than 2 seconds to consistency check. We hope that this will add to the stability of IGSS, that whenever you save, you will be notified if the operation you just have performed has added to some inconsistencies. Hopefully you'll let us know, because then we can fix whatever bugs might be in this area. You can still bypass this by saying ignore. The recommendation is to say backup and fix, and this is, you cannot just fix, you'll always have a backup created, and that will be put in the new backup folder hierarchy I showed you earlier. If you get continuous consistency check errors, please let us know so that we can fix the underlying bug. When you add a graphic, we've had this somewhat special notation that for each graphic you can also show the name of the object and the value of the object. You could only anchor that text left or right. Now you can anchor it center as well. It's mainly for valves and motors, so that you can center the current state below if you want that. it's now possible to control whether a graphic element is visible or invisible. We've had that option in layers, but layers are suited for some different purpose where you more or less put the entire configuration into a different mode. This is for controlling individual graphic elements, so you can say that this button should only be visible if a particular object is in a particular state or is in alarm or not in alarm. It's one of the requests we've had for many years, so now it's possible to make user interfaces where the user can only enter values if it actually makes sense based on the current state of the plant. In the SCADA industry, currently there's a lot of discussion about situational awareness, and it started out being called high performance HMI. Now there was a problem with that due to some books using that title. It's landed on situational awareness, and the principle is that it's the design of diagrams and should be conducted in such a way that it's very easy for an operator to determine between normal operation and non-normal operation. And it should be very easy to distinguish if a signal is in the normal range or near outside the normal range. Our friends at Wonderware has made substantial changes to InTouch to incorporate this in their latest release. We have done something similar to our old graphics, the bar graphic and the pie graphic. So it's possible to do something similar if you use these two. Have a look at it. I think some of the thoughts behind this is very interesting. Color, whenever you pick a color, we've gone for the same palette as is used in Microsoft Office, and one palette only. Before we had up to 3 palettes. You can now define your own custom colors, which are persisted between runs, so you will see the same color again the next time you launch IGSS. When you pick an element in IGSS in the definition module, the amount of information shown in the status bar is much more comprehensive. Now you see what kind of graphic object you have selected, what kind of object it is linked to, the name of that object, what state the object is in, what template that object is based on, and so forth. Especially when working with digital objects, it's very nice to know what state am I currently supposed to be looking at. Format cloning, it's very similar to the format clone you see in Microsoft's Office application. It basically just takes the graphic object you have selected and copy the graphical formatting. So its font, its colors, its frames, its all the non-object stuff is then being copied to the other selected objects. I will have I'll show that later during the demo session. It means that for all the graphical stuff, you don't have to go into the property table view. Property table view is very, very powerful, but it can also be a little bit difficult to work with for stuff like the graphics, because you're not completely sure what you have selected and what you haven't selected. This should make it a whole lot easier. When you work with the graphics, I believe it was in version 11, we introduced some very good alignment features. Now we're taking this one step further with snapping as you work. We call it smart snapping because we actually look at what you have selected and what we expect you're trying to do. If you look at the, I apologize for this being in Danish, but I think you get the picture. If you have selected a text in a row of text, our guess is that you probably want to align these texts to the left, and you want to base align it with the little OK over to the right. So this is where we snap. We try to help you to put it into that position. If you're working with symbols, like you have just below, we expect you to probably want to center this symbol both vertically and horizontally. We don't start to look at texts and all other graphics. When you look at work with pipes, we expect that you probably want this pipe to have a bend at the same place as the other pipe you already did. It's turned on by default, smart snapping. You could just turn it off if you don't like it. Like all these snap features, sometimes it's a little bit annoying, but there's a shortcut. Just hold down the Shift key, I believe, and then you disconnect, you disable the smart snapping while doing that particular draw operation you're doing. Our property table view has been greatly performance optimized, so that when you open and close, it's a lot faster. You can do search and replace in all fields, not just text fields, but also object names. Yeah, everything, colors, fonts, nodes, whatever. And it's been optimized in how you work with it. In version 11, if you wanted to edit a cell, you first had to click to select the cell, then you had to click again to get the little combo enabled, then you had to click on the combo to make it drop down, and then you had to select in the drop down. That was 4 clicks to do a single operation. Now you can just right click to get directly to the editing. Search and replace is just like you see in any other editor. You can do it all at once or just confirm each and every replace. In version 11, you had a property table view in the area menu that would show you all the objects in a particular area. That has now been extended to show you all descriptors as well, which is all the graphical representations of an object, of all the objects. So you get all the graphics from all the diagrams in that area. That can be quite huge. This is actually why it was necessary to performance optimize the property table view. But it also means you can very easily see if you have consistency in your fonts, in your colors, stuff like that. It's not meant for editing. It's meant for controlling if stuff is consistent and working with objects and their bindings. Our templates can now also be edited in a property table view, which means it's very simple to get all the colors and backgrounds and alarm indication make that consistent. Our object browser is now resizable, and we remember the size and all the columns, all the filters, whatever you had, we remember that from time to time. You will probably find out, like I did, that it just takes 5 minutes in version 12, and then if you go back to version 11, it's so annoying that you cannot resize it. So that's one of those little helps that just makes so much difference in everyday work. Other small changes, you can now use embedded diagrams in our faceplates. You couldn't do that before. The supervise click menu can now be completely disabled, and then all the actions that were normally accessible for the end users through that menu, you can do your own implementation by having button actions. This is intended for people that want to remove the click menu altogether and replace it by a faceplate. Our old bitmap symbols, you can now import and export entire tables, and you can delete individual symbols if you don't want them anymore. You can now have individual, it's a little bit complicated, but if you've ever been down that road, you know exactly what I mean. You can now have individual alarm numbers for PLC-based analog alarms. You already had that for digital objects, but now you have the same for analog objects as well. So you don't have to have all your alarms located right after each other. Some new calculation functions to tell you if an object is passive, has been reset, is spooling, so forth. Our dashboard, the dashboard application, it's not that widely used, but some end users like it a lot because it allows them to do some dashboarding themselves rather than have a system integrator do an entire diagram. It's now possible to have a more snazzy and sexy illustration of a live value through some new widgets, a meter widget and a bar widget. Some features has been obsoleted. In supervise and definition, you could actually customize the entire menu. That didn't work, so that has been removed. We had a concept called OLE diagrams. It hasn't been used for many years. That has been obsoleted. And we had a descriptor called DB grid. I'm not sure what it was ever intended for, but it was very complicated to configure and wasn't used, so that has been deprecated. That was sort of the configuration changes. Now we come to the more end-user-oriented changes. Our mobile app has been a huge success, at least locally here in Denmark, and in some countries it's still waiting to happen. Nevertheless, due to the huge success in Denmark, we've had some requests. First is to have the alarm counter as a widget, so that you wouldn't have to go into the application to see your alarm count. We've implemented that as a widget for both iOS and Android. The concept is completely different between the two. In iOS, you can only have a widget on your today view, whereas in Android, it's a widget you can place on your home screen. It basically just shows the alarm counter, and then you can navigate directly to the plant from the widget. It's now possible for the end user on the phone to specify a particular object as being a favorite object. Favorite objects are then very easy accessible if he wants to look at the current value. This means he can pinpoint 8 different values from throughout the system, and then he can see it in his favorite list. Very suitable for stuff you're working on right now, so you don't have to navigate the entire hierarchy with area, diagram, so forth. It gives you basically the same information if you had navigated, so it's just much easier to access. And the last push notifications. The end user can now say he wants alarms as push notifications. From the end user point of view, it's very similar to what the Notifier module does. But the Notifier module is much more comprehensive in terms of what you can do with duty rosters and planning. This is very, very simple. It's the owner of each individual phone that decides, yes, I want alarms as push notifications from this filter, and he can turn it off as well. It doesn't replace Notifier. Notifier is for handling a duty organization. These push notifications are for very simple notifications. While if you're working on something and you didn't complete it completely on Friday, you just turn on these notifications over the weekend so that you get notified if things run all bad. The good part is that you don't need a GSM modem. We handle the communication through the data network. This is actually how push notifications work. All the existing mobile apps will just be updated through Apple App Store and Google Play. The new version is already there. If you upgrade your app but stay on the IGSS version 11 server, that still works. If you upgrade your server to version 12 but don't upgrade your app, that works as well. You of course don't get the latest functionality, but what you had in your version 11 app will still work. And all the cloud stuff to get this work is still paid by Schneider Electric. It's part of the package, and it's a lot easier to get this running on a site because you don't have any fees. And the biggest change in version 12 from an end user point of view is a complete new graphing, what we call trending. We call it graphing, the industry calls it trending module. What we had before was very old and could, in some instances, be quite slow and tedious. So we've rewritten that completely. To be much more interactive, to be much more modern. Some of the features are somewhat different from the old one. So you might want to have that discussion with the end user. We published a video for end users that go through all the changes. Maybe you can use that as part of the process in an upgrade. First of all, performance has been greatly improved. First of all, due to the new log file format. It means the trend is much faster. We also read data in the background. The old trend was very one step after each other. First of all, you had to specify the period. Once you've done that, we started to read data. That took some time. And at the end of that, we presented you with a window. Now it's sort of in parallel. We start to read data the second you open it. We present a trend or a coordinate system. We haven't got anything to put in it yet, but just that fact that everything is on screen much faster makes it much more responsive and a completely different experience for the end user. We also make much more smart use of all the different kinds of historic data we have in IGSS. We have different kind of reductions that can be very fast to read. If you have hourly reductions and put that into an SQL server, it can be very, very fast to retrieve hourly values for a month or a whole year, rather than going through binary log files. You can mix and match all that in the same graph, either specify what it should or just leave it in auto, and we'll just read whatever data is best suitable for the period and situation you're in right now. And you now have access to month, day, and hour reduction as well. You couldn't do a graph on that before. So what this auto data source does, it looks as to your right, you have what is now in time, and then the different types of data grow backwards in time. So going to left is backwards in time. Log, we often see that you only have log data for a limited period. But that's also the most recent data. Then the base reductions go a little bit further back, but it takes some time before that has been reduced, so you don't have for the last few minutes. Hour reductions is, of course, you need to go 1 hour back or up to 1 hour back before you have that, and so forth. Basically, you don't have to worry about that. We analyze this and read whatever data is best suitable. We try to make all the frequent operations that an end user might do much more easy. When you have your trend and you want to see a different period, you just scroll back and forth. It's very easy. If you want to change period from say 1 day to 1 week, there's some very easy predefined periods like today, 1 week back, this month, so forth. I can show you in a few minutes, so that the end user don't have to spend a lot of time clicking through date and hour and minute selections. We try to make it a lot more interactive. The old graph we had of trend wasn't interactive. You could change colors and that was pretty much it. Now we hope that we have the foundation to make a very clever analysis tool. We haven't been able to put all the tools in from day one. We had to create the foundation first. But we hope during the next releases that we can use this to get some very clever analysis in. All the old trends you had, the predefined trends, they will automatically be converted. In earlier versions, you had to remember to run a conversion tool. You don't have to do that anymore. When the end user is zooming, you have a much better overview because you get the full graph overview. You can show individual data points. If the user adds multiple signals that would result in the same y-axis being shown again and again, we just hide it. Why show 3 axes with 0 to 200? Doesn't make sense. Digital signals are automatically stacked at the bottom, only showing use states. Sounds a bit odd. It's very natural once I show it to you. The new graphs have full data precision. I'm not sure if everyone knew, but the existing one had some downsampling of data where, depending on the entire period, an average value was calculated. That's not the case anymore. We show exactly the data as it was logged or reduced. So if there's a spike in your data, you will see a spike on the screen. It will not be calculated away. If there's no data, you will have a hole in the graph. New stuff that you couldn't do before. We had the concept of a dynamic graph, which was sort of a strange beast because it used an object called graph. We completely revised that, so you now have operator graphs. You can have as many operator graphs as you want. It's defined by the end user. He can save it as a file if he wants, and he can reopen that file later on. It's now possible to show a title above the graph, so that if you produce trends for documentation, then the title can describe what you're actually seeing. The legends can be placed left, right, bottom, rather than just on top. And you can have up to 16 signals in one trend. And finally, the party pieces, You can have multiple time axes, so you can actually very easily compare a signal with another period. I'll show that in a few minutes. So let's go for demonstration. I cannot go through each and every feature, so I will focus on the drawing enhancement, which means the snapping, the format cloning. I'll create a brand new diagram just to have a playground. Make it white. Just add a few buttons. You'll now notice that when I move this button, I've just chosen a button. It could be all other graphic elements. It just falls into place on, first of all, on the left edge, and if the distance is right, it does the same. So creating a bunch of buttons that are aligned with the same distance is very, very, very easy. You could have used the alignment tools for that, but this is just so much easier and so much faster. Let's just create. Now I've changed some graphical properties. If I want to propagate that to all the other buttons, this is where I just right-click and say this format clone also has a hotkey, and then all the buttons are just the same. You could have done, in principle, done it in properties overview. This is just much more visual and very easy. If I now go for a few pipes, this is also where you can see when the pipe endpoint goes to the same position as the one above, it sort of snaps. Whoops. But it's very easy to do pipes as part of where you construct it from individual pipe segments. If I create a new valve, like this one, it's a bit hard to see. I'll just change the colors from this. When the valve comes on the center of the pipe, it snaps. So hopefully it will save you some time during drawing. And then the final part is the new strength. So I'll just switch to a configuration that has some real site data. It's It's a big wastewater treatment plant in southern Denmark. So the text will be in Danish. I apologize for that, but I'm sure you'll get the point. I'll move to a classic pump station. Well, this is quite a big one actually. Three pretty big pumps and 2 auxiliary pumps. This is the pump speed, and this is a pump current consumption. If we look at the current and take a graph, I just need to change period to, need to go to the date where I have some data. That's the August last year. 18th of August, that's 11-ish. There. To see what this was like, what is happening over here to the right, you just take and grab the time axis. Very, very simple. As you move into a region where you haven't read data, we will read data. If you want to add the other pump current to this one as well, you have an option to add it to an existing one. Now you just have both. Here you can see that the 2 pumps are actually running in some kind of alternation. If you want to see what lockings is this based on, you can have a little point for each. If you want to show the specific individual values, you have the slider where you can, what's the value there. If I zoom in to have a look at this, you can see by default when we zoom period rather than some little area up to the left where you completely lose your orientation on the graph. The minute I zoom in, I still have the original graph. I can navigate in this, so the end user keeps the overview of the data. Right now, when I open an operator graph, it just shows 1 hour. If I want to change that, I can just say change period. I want 2 hours. I get 2 hours. And finally, if I want to, well, let me just hide everything but this one. Let's get the, let's get one of the digital values. You'll notice that these were shown below, sort of to separate it, and if I add multiple, they are stacked as well. If I now hit compare periods, you'll notice that all signals are sort of duplicated, and you get a separate time axis at the top. And here you can actually right-click and say, hey, go back in time 1 day. How did this signal look at exactly the same time 1 day before? So down here you have Tuesday the 18th. Up here you have Monday the 17th, but the time is exactly the same. So it's very, very easy to compare signals from, actually you can also just drag up here. So let's say you change the set point or something like that. it's very easy to compare what effect did that change have on some of the other values. Okay, that was IGSS version 12 in 1 hour. I couldn't go as much into every detail as I wanted. Have a look at the PDF document that describes each and every change in painstaking detail. And then we're open for questions. Unless I killed everyone. If that's not the case, I'll say thank you very much for spending time with IGSS version 12 today.